With the recent arrival of the new and rather impressive Chevy Corvette, we thought it'd be a nice time to look back at some very cool classic American muscle cars that were made in relatively limited numbers and had some very cool tech. I'm Brian Cooley with my top 5 muscle cars that we can hear echoes of today. We're going to rank these guys by their rarity of production. Let's go. Number 5, 64 Pontiac GTO in the Tri-Power configuration. About 8,200 of these. John DeLorean gave it its name. He was working at GM at the time. Inspired by Ferrari's Gran Turismo Omologato nomenclature of the same era. Blasphemy to many Ferraristi, since this was basically a Pontiac Le Mans, another optimistic American use of European car terminology. But add the optional Tri-Power triple 2-barrel carb package and you're getting 348 horsepower from the very first muscle car. Today you can draw a pretty straight line from the GTO idea to performance tiers today like BMW M, Audi S, Mercedes AMG, although I noticed they never call their cars things like Talladega. Number 4, the 69 Mustang 428 Cobra Jet, 2,870 made. Mustang was a pony car faring poorly in the street drag culture back in the early part of the muscle car era. So Ford made up for it by wedging their 428 big block into that car and topping it with the freer breathing heads from the even more impressive 427 engine. They also gave it a ram air scoop, bigger intake valves, all of this foreshadowing the theme today of working on freer breathing engines for faster running. The end result in this Mustang was 411 horsepower. And those same physics lessons that it brought to the market underlie today's trend toward things like air intake kits. So I'm afraid nothing will make your Mitsubishi sound like an R-code Mustang. Number 3, 68 Dodge Charger RT Hemi. 467 copies. 68 was the first year for the Charger in its Coke bottle shape with that wide inset grille, still fresh looking today. You know this guy as the bad guy's badass car in the chase scene from Bullitt. Now when you add the 426 Hemi option, that's where the badass part came from. 425 horsepower, 490 foot-pounds of torque. Hemi refers to the fact the engine had hemispherical combustion chamber roofs. Other engines did and do, but nobody markets it like Chrysler. Number 2, the 69 Camaro ZL1. Just 69 were made. This ZL1 was created by speccing a rather arcane factory option code called COPO 9560. That added a $4,000 427 V8 to a $2,200 car. It made over 500 horsepower and did 0 to 60 on slippery old-school tires in a still impressive today 5.3 seconds. By the way, those optional ZL1 engines were hand-built in what was basically a clean room, overseen by none other than one Zora Arkus Duntov, the head engineer of the Vet. Before we get to number 1, the car that could have been, except it really isn't a production car and not fully an American car. It's the 67 Shelby Cobra 427 Super Snake. They just made 2. As if a 427 Ford V8 wasn't enough, Carroll Shelby bolted on a pair of superchargers for a total of 800 horse in a car that weighs about the same as your fat uncle after a big meal. Of the 2 made, Shelby kept one for himself, gave the other to Bill Cosby, who scared himself so bad he immediately gave it back, at which time it was sold through the Ford dealer in San Francisco to some other guy who also couldn't handle it and drove it off a cliff into the Pacific Ocean. That's why performance cars have ABS and traction control today. Our number 1 classic American muscle car that foreshadowed the future, the 71 Hemi Cuda convertible. Yes, just 11 of these Plymouths were made in ragtop form with the 426 Hemi. This is the last year that engine was offered, by the way, in production. Incredibly rare, especially since most muscle cars were incredibly shoddily made. This was an interesting example of something we take for granted today: extreme performance and a ragtop. It took some decades of engineering later to get that to really work without cars turning themselves into pretzels, and today you find high horsepower cars that give up nothing by having their roof go down. You can trace that back to the Hemi Cuda drop top. For more high-tech cars back then, today, and tomorrow, check out cnetoncars.com. I'm Brian Cooley. Thanks for watching.